We all wanna be heard. We all want to be seen. We all wanna be valued as a part of the team. And when we're working together, we doing much better. Here's to the dream. Education is liberation, but application's the key. It's called social emotional learning. Tables is turning, we getting free. Bringing our whole selves to the journey. Healing the herd, who bigger than we. Self-aware and prepared. Only good vibrations in the air. Only we control what we share. Hip-hop airs with the vision that's clear and the mission sincere. Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. For the culture, yeah, yeah. You know we do it for the culture, yeah, yeah. We set the trends and do the motion, the pick and pose, yeah, yeah. Hip hop all across the globe, yeah. Do it for the culture, yeah, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar, Unpacking the Fate of the Department of Education. My name is Jamila Sams. I'm the founder of We Do It for the Culture. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. James Baldwin. Tonight, we are choosing to face the truth. We are at a pivotal moment in American education. The very existence of the U.S. Department of Education, a federal safeguard for educational equity, civil rights, and access to quality education, is being questioned. And if dismantled, the consequences won't be theoretical, they'll be real, direct, and deeply harmful, especially for the communities already most marginalized. This conversation isn't about bureaucracy. It's about children. It's about classrooms. It's about whether public education will remain a public good or become a political casualty. And We Do It for the Culture, we are not standing still. We are actively creating spaces to lift up culturally responsive teaching and social emotional learning, which helps schools to foster safety, healing, and belonging, regardless of racist policies or executive orders. Our work is rooted in the belief that every student deserves to feel seen, affirmed, and empowered, and that culture is not a barrier to learning, it is the foundation of learning. Tonight, we've brought together some brilliant minds in education, journalism, advocacy, and school leadership to unpack what is at stake and imagine what's possible. So we invite you not only to listen, but to engage, to act, and to commit. Because as Baldwin has reminded us, change begins the moment we have the courage to face what's in front of us. And with that said, we have a few housekeeping items that we would like to share before we get started. You will be able to ask questions of the panelists this evening. And to do that, we're going to ask that you use the Q&A button below. And also, if you have a question for a specific person, please put their name at the front of your question. Also, you'll have the opportunity to click on the raise the hand button during the Q&A portion. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our MC for We Do It for the Culture. And in our world, MC is for hip hop and MC is also for the Master of Curriculum, Kareem McQuilkin.
Thank you for that, Jamila. Thank you for that intro. And I love that new title that you came up with when you shared it with me the other day. I felt honored. I felt like I finally got a record deal. But yeah, thank you, Jamila. So I am Kareem McQuilk, and I'm a former New York City public school teacher and citywide leadership coach. And currently, I'm the education manager at We Do It for the Culture. So I design adult learning experiences and student learning experiences, and I also help curate these types of webinars and anything new that we're trying to do because we got to keep our imagination alive all the time, especially during these times. So we got to try new things and do new things to stay in community. So since We Do It for the Culture is a culturally responsive social emotional learning curriculum, it's only right that we kick off tonight's session with a take 5 for the culture question. So the question is, and please answer it in 30 seconds or less, which of these 5 social emotional learning competencies has helped you remain motivated and inspired during these turbulent times? And can you share a quick example? So I'm going to kick it over to you first, Kaylin, to respond to this question.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on this webinar. I would say responsible decision making is the one that I have relied on probably the most, both in my personal and professional life. I'd say an example has been, as folks have gotten laid off from the Department of Education, and I've been writing about what's happening to them, trying to honor their stories without putting them in jeopardy for potentially getting a new job has been really important to me, and that's required a lot of communication and sensitivity. So that's the one I'd say that has been motivating me.
And how about you, Dr. McKeezy? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, Kareem, I was literally just mulling over that question, even as Kaylin was talking, and I said, maybe social awareness for me, right? Because I feel that, as an educator, every time I walk into spaces, I try to do it with my eyes wide open, just seeing every child, every parent, every educator, and just realizing that I have the ability to heal, right? I have the ability to heal any and every person that's within that school community. So I think self-awareness is that space for me to be able to walk into that room knowing that I'm there for a purpose and I can actually make that change that I actually speak of.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Social awareness. All right. And Mimi, how about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I'm going back and forth between self-management and relationship skills, but I think I'll lean towards relationship skills just because I think community is everything right now. So I'm tapping into my community, both professionally and personally, and just really taking a moment to humanize, our experiences. And we don't have to, continue to work ourselves through, in the ground. I'm like, hey, let's actually take these times to like honor each other's humanity. Like, what do you need on a personal level to feel fulfilled in this moment where you're constantly feeling drained?
Nice, nice. Thank you for that. Yes, relationship skills. That's what brought us all here together today. So I'll let everybody know who these wonderful panelists that we have are and their backgrounds with us today. So Kaylin, Kaylin Belcher is a national reporter for Chalkbeat, based in Chicago. Previously, she covered education for the Chicago Reporter, the Catalyst Chicago, and the Suburban Chicago Tribune. And she's a former Spencer Fellow in education reporting at Columbia University and has taught journalism at Loyola University, Chicago. So thank you for being here with us today, Kaylin. I know when I first heard about Kaylin, I went on Chalkbeat and then I saw that she's has over 100 stories written about all the topics related to the Department of Education. So she has all of the latest information that we need. And then next up is Dr. Dennis McKeezy, the founder and CEO of In Our Best Interest LLC and the Off School Grounds Coalition Inc. And I'll just give a quick plug. They meet every Thursday at 4. He was just on there earlier, so thank you for being here right after that. He has over 30 years of experience in public, private, and charter schools in New York City. He believes that empowered educators are key to student success, urban school reform, and community development. He's a former principal with a proven track record. He now consults nationally with schools and districts, sharing strategies for effective leadership. And then we have Mimi Wolde Johannes, an educational justice advocate with over 10 years of experience in classrooms and the education nonprofit sector. She currently serves as managing director of external affairs at the Center for Black Educator Development, where she leads national partnerships, advocacy, and the We Need Black Teachers campaign. And I got one of those t-shirts too. Oh, I didn't even realize you had it on as I was about to say that. Yes. So shout out to all of our great panelists that we have on tonight. I'm excited because I'm going to be learning as well, even though I'm serving as the MC. So we're going to open it up with a question for you, Kaylin. So as a national journalist at Chalkbeat, what is your role when it comes to covering recent news related to the Department of Education? And what do you wish more people knew about your role?
Yeah, so I see my job as kind of helping readers wade through all of the like kind of torrent of information that's coming out right now. Every day I literally get like over 100 emails, and it's from advocates, from the Department of Education, from politicians. And so I think my job right now is to help us figure out like what are the most important issues, what are the things that could really affect schools, and how can we convey that information in a way that's helpful to people. Something I wish people knew a little bit more about my role is just kind of how we go about doing our reporting work. I think a lot of this is just based on information that we have known and collected over a really long time. And I've been an education reporter for about 12 years now. And so when breaking news happens, like a lot of it is just you have to be really familiar with where information lives, especially as we have a department that's taking that information away. So having a good long memory is something really important to my profession right now.
Nice, nice. Thank you for that, Kaylin and Dr. McKeezy. So I know you're on the ground working with leaders in education who are receiving this news at a rapid pace, right? And
Yeah.
so I'd love to know, as a consultant for these educational leaders, how are they navigating the uncertainty tied to these changes and these rapid changes in the Department of Education?
Kareem, that's again a great question. Just the work that I'm doing with school leaders, man, it just seems to be intensified even more that they're stepping up and not waiting for Washington or waiting for, as we talked about early, waiting for Superman to come and save our children, right? And so they're building the future from the ground up. And so the more I think about it, I haven't seen this level of boldness in leaders in a very long time. When I'm talking about, I'm not only talking about the blue state principle. I'm talking about those in the South as well who just basically the red states who basically says, you know what, we got a job to do and we're going to get it done. So I think just watching the boldness that are coming from leaders right now is something that I see is just cutting through all this noise. We know that it exists. We know it's there. We know it is a problem. But we most certainly are not going to stop the work that we got to do. And I see that in school leaders across the nation. And so I see them using data not to comply, but to confront these inequities, right? I don't see them just looking at data and saying, oh, okay, we can't do this anymore. I see them finding creative ways to make sure that children and students get the highest quality education. And then also too, something simple as just forming coalitions like OSG and coalitions within their community, just to move faster, and deeper. And that most certainly can make a tremendous impact when we as educators realize that we don't have to do this work alone and we shouldn't be doing this type of work alone. Like it is extremely challenging to have this conversation about inequities and try to do it in silos. So I truly believe that boldness is at the heart of the leadership and most school leaders at this and throughout the country at this time.
Nice. Thank you for that word. And that word boldness, just one knowing the work that you do and the work that you lead, it's
Yeah,
very bold, right? And I'm gonna make sure that everybody here learns a little bit more about the OSG during this
yeah,
conversation.
yeah.
Um, and Mimi, I'm gonna come to you. The work that you're doing, right? That work boldness just lives all within the name of the organization that you work for, right? So I want to know, how have recent changes at the Department of Education impacted your work as the managing director of external affairs at the Center for Black Educator Development?
Well, thank you for that question. So we, the Center for Black Educator Development, our mission is to rebuild the national Black teacher pipeline to achieve educational justice. And so that's racial justice and educational equity. That's the intersection. So we understand that without the oversight of the Department of Education, should it be eradicated by this administration, we understand that the racial and economic divides in this country will just continue to widen. And then we know that students from marginalized communities will continue to face greater disparities. I believe, we believe at the center that programs that are also working to strengthen the educator workforce and also promote educator diversity, those are all now at risk, as we know. And that will continue to, unfortunately, further devalue the educator profession. And it's going to continue to hinder progress that we were making towards achieving some sort of an equitable education for all students. We know at this moment, Black teacher recruitment and retention numbers are low, where we have 15% of the nation's public school students identifying as Black. We only have 7%, I believe now 6% of those identifying as Black teachers in the workforce. And we understand that it's, with the moves that this current administration is making is just going to continue to make our jobs a lot harder. And they're not offering any feasible solutions at this time either. Additionally, we also know that the department released a Dear Colleague letter earlier this year that essentially said that any DEI efforts would be considered unlawful and that schools would lose funding should they engage in these efforts. And we know that this is a direct threat to our work. Unfortunately, we also understand that schools will most likely be reluctant to work with organizations such as ours that have the word Black in their name. So we understood that, the Center for Black Educator Development, we were created for such a time like this. We are certainly unapologetic about our commitment to supporting, training, and protecting Black educators, and of course, all students, which is why we made a strategic decision to join the National Education Association, or the NEA for short, and a lawsuit which was filed by the ACLU last month. So this is an ongoing lawsuit. We will definitely share some additional updates across our channels. However, we do believe that this is a time to act, and this is a time for courageous and bold leadership. So I'll stop with that.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Mimi. Yeah, I got to go to the OSG conference and the Center for Black Educator Development Conference in the same year, and I promise you, those are two of the highlights of my educational career. I'm about halfway to where you at, Dennis, in my career, and I needed those conferences to really keep me inspired and motivated. So thank you for sharing that, Mimi. So we're gonna come back around to you, Kaylin. The news is coming out quick, right, and rapidly. And now we have the 24-hour news cycle, right? Which we didn't have when the department was first created. So what misconceptions are emerging and how might they be shaping public opinion?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions and misunderstandings is like, what does the Department of Education actually do and what are its responsibilities? So I think part of our job as journalists has been to really specifically explain what the department does and why would it matter if particular functions no longer existed. Some of those are easy to explain to readers about doing education research or about helping to train teachers. And some of them are kind of more opaque. And so I think like the refrain that we've heard from Republican leaders and from President Trump has been, we're going to return all this power to the states. And largely states and local school districts already have most of the power in education. The federal government certainly plays a really important role, but I think like kind of the division of power and who gets to decide things has been the biggest misconception that I have to kind of explain in my reporting. And I think the other one is like whether or not the president has the authority to do something versus whether or not he says he's going to do something. And we've seen this happen a lot in the executive orders. Maybe just mentioned some of the ones that have come out recently around racism and DEI. And certainly the president can put pressure on schools to do things, but some of the things he's asking them to do are not legal, and there's a million legal challenges to them. So I think right now we have to really be careful to explain what the law says. He might try to break the law, or others might try to do that for him. But I think it is really important to try to cite statute. And I've done that in a lot of my reporting right now, is to say, like, in the Department of Education, when it was created, this is what the law says. And, there might be cases where people are not following the law, but I think it's really important to just say what the law says.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. I feel like I'm learning a lot about law without even necessarily trying to these past couple of weeks. So thank you for your past couple of months actually now. Yeah. So thank you for your coverage on all of these stories. And I have a quick follow-up to something you said, Kellen. So, you're trying to get this information out there, right? So on the ground, who are some of the people that you're meeting with in order to make sure that you're getting news that you can rely on?
I would say I have a combination of folks that I've been going to. I'd say advocates who understand civil rights are people who have been really valuable to us right now as they've been dismantling the civil rights protections. People who work in the Title IX space who understand how that affects athletics have been really helpful for me. Obviously, parents who've had their civil rights cases slowed down, those have been really helpful. And then also people who used to work in the administration, people who've left or who used to be working for the Biden or Obama administration, those folks have been really helpful to me.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that insight. And so Dr. McKeezy, I know so as Kaylin mentioned, right? We know that as the department is as they're attempting to dismantle the department, equity programs are being dismantled as a part of that, right? So how can school leaders, and you spoke to this a little bit earlier, but if there's like a specific story you could share, if without sharing any specific names, of if that might
Yeah.
put their position on the line, but how can school leaders and community leaders ensure equity remains a priority amidst potential systemic shifts and pressure?
Yeah, first of all, Kareem, they got to speak up about it, right? Leaders who stay silent about equity, become complicit. And I want us to understand that the conversation needs to be had and need to be had out loud. That when we really talk about equity, we got to understand that especially throughout this country, you see that even though it may not be loud in certain states in the country anymore, it's still alive. The conversation still is alive. And I think when we as educators realize that the bulk of the people in this country really do want to offer equitable solutions to educational problems like this, like I think we can build on that, right? If we ultimately think that equity is dead and that no one wants to have a conversation around DEI anymore, then I think we ultimately give up all the power that we once had in being able to speak up about something as important as this. And so I think people got to get to the space where we're starting to shift the language, but not the mission, right? And so we hear, as Mimi was talking about earlier, and other organizations like Black Educators Rock, or just watching some of our other amazing speakers throughout the country, like Principal Kafele, different people, they didn't change their mission. You know what I'm saying? They just shifted the language. And so we got to be very mindful that that we actually have the ability to set the bar, and that we can actually set the bar higher in these type of conversations. I just think if we walk into it being defeated, thinking that the conversation around equity shouldn't take place and we shouldn't have it, then ultimately they won. And I don't want that to be the case. And so when I see leaders all across this country, I see it every day where people fight for equity. They fight for greater equity for young people. And I'm talking about principals from New York all the way over to Compton and everywhere in between. The conversation doesn't stop. It's just the methodology that they use to deliver the message is something that shifts without shifting the mission.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down, Dr. McKeezy. So I have a follow-up question to that, right? I
So,
mentioned the Thursday meetups at 4 o'clock, right?
mhm.
How is that space one that allows people leaders in particular, to remain connected and inspired? Like, what's the purpose of that space and how has it impacted you and those that are a part of it?
Yeah, so this weekly meetup that I have with leaders from across the nation has taken place for the past 5 years, and I realized that again, once people feel siloed, they feel that their voice isn't as strong and isn't as powerful. So I think being able to kind of coalesce them in that one space once a week really does strengthen their ability to know that you don't tackle equity problems in by yourself. Like it is impossible. You know, you have a crew, you have a family, you have a group of people who think just like you, and we offer suggestions and solutions on how to actually work through those inequities and things like that. And so I think the space, it's important that we create those spaces for educators to talk out loud about it, you know, and that's why I'm so impressed by what you all are doing here, because we're bringing light to a conversation that I think people are having, but they're having in their little corners. They're not having the conversation around how do we solve this problem that of dismantling or possibly dismantling the educational system here in this country. But there is a part to that discussion that I think needs to be had with other people who are experiencing the same struggles that you have. And so that's why the meetup is so important. That's why all school grounds in OSG in particular is just so important, is that they don't have to do it alone. And I basically stand as the visionary for it by saying, I realized that in all sports that I've ever played, there's never been one person that was able to carry a team by himself, even the great Michael Jordan. So I think it's important that, you know, I continue to build out an organization or a coalition like this so that people can have these type of conversations on an ongoing basis.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for that breakdown. And so we got Chalkbeat, right? We got the OSG, right?
Uh-huh.
There's like a whole new community being formed right now. And I feel that network expanding. So it's forming like Voltron, right?
There you
So
go.
Mimi, I want to learn a little bit more about the external partnership aspect of your role, right? How do external partnerships support your organization during times of federal policy uncertainty?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to say plus one to everything that Dr. McKesey said. It definitely resonates with me and the work that we're doing at the Center for Black Educator Development. I will say, we also abide by the African proverb: "If you want to go far, go together." And so coalition building is definitely it's always been and it will continue to be such an integral part of the work that we're doing. Like I mentioned earlier, the mission of our organization is to rebuild the national Black teacher pipeline. And at many points of the teacher pipeline, there's so many leaky parts, and we're trying to think about partnerships that will help us insulate that pipeline so that it will no longer remain leaky, and that we can continue to invite young people into the pipeline and help them matriculate every step of the way and eventually into the classroom and beyond. And so we need partnerships to support with that, and you know, on a local level and a national level, of course. And we also understand that you know, it's so important that that we're standing in solidarity with like-minded organizations, like with those of you all on this call and many others, to think about how we can continue to just remain in solidarity and organize and collectively organize and be much more effective together.
Nice. Thank you so much. So I love that proverb, right? If you want to go far, go together, right? And those, so you mentioned leaky parts in the Black teacher pipeline, right? Can you speak a little bit more to that and why it's so important, why the Black teacher pipeline is so important, especially during these times that we're in right now?
Sure. You know, the leaky parts, you know, start with really and truly the experience that a lot of our young people are having within their K through 12 schooling. How often are we even inviting young people that look like us to become teachers? Oftentimes it's well after they've acquired their college degree. And at that point, education is probably the last thing on their radar. And so we need to think about how we can make schools you know, more inviting places for our youth to want to even come back to. Our good friend Chris Emden, a phenomenal scholar, he's a speaker at BMEC every year as well. He always says that when you are talking, especially to Black male students and asking them to come and teach, he says that you're essentially inviting them to a scene of the crime. they're often there's so many crimes that are committed against them while they were in school, and it could be traumatizing for them to want to come back into the classroom. And there are lots of other barriers that exist, whether you're talking about certification, whether you're talking about the cost to become a teacher, which is, education is a very expensive degree to acquire. And at the center, we're trying to problem solve around that and ensure that everyone that goes through our programming understands the opportunities that are available to them so that they are able to graduate from college with as little to no debt as possible. So we have, a fellowship that we run in partnership with UNCF to provide tuition support along with mentoring and other academic coaching elements too. So it's so important that we continue to think through, like I said, how to insulate this pipeline so that especially our young Black youth are thinking about education as a lucrative career option so that they can see themselves reflected in the classroom at a younger age as well. And also just really thinking about, figuring out how because of, like I mentioned, there's only 7% or 6% of educators that identify as Black in the workforce. And so we have a long way to go until we achieve parity. And we are trying to problem solve around that as we speak. And we want to make sure that our young people have, all opportunities available to them, because we often refer to the statistic around, when Black students have just 1 or 2 Black educators within their K through 12 schooling, they're much more likely to graduate from high school and go to college. I know that when they have 2 Black teachers, they're 32% more likely to go to college. So there's clearly, something positive happening there. We want to continue to uplift that research across all of our work.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, no statistics are alarming. What you mentioned about inviting, or Dr. Emder says about you essentially inviting them to the scene of the crime. That's so powerful. I just remember when I was in the classroom, and my school was predominantly Black boys, and just speaking to them about the power of the role that I'm in. Some of them, they would ask me questions about being an educator and being a coach and what got me into it. And I let them know that if I wasn't here right now, then chances are you probably have a white woman here teaching you, right? Because they're the majority within this teaching space. I always felt like more people like me, we can understand you in ways that others can't, right? Grad school taught me a lot about teaching, but my life experiences taught me so much more. So yeah, thank you for centering that.
I'll also share
Oh,
really quickly,
okay.
when I was in 4th grade, I remember telling my teacher that I wanted to be a teacher. This is, a well-intentioned white woman who immediately told me, no, you don't want to do this job. Like you don't get paid enough. And while that still continues to, remain true, like unfortunately, teacher compensation is still one of those areas that we still have a long way to go on. I still became an educator despite, her recommendation to not go into the field. And I just think like that is also a common theme that our young people are hearing, a common pattern, like, this isn't the career that you want to go into. And we also have to be mindful of those messages that they're receiving.
Right. Yep. Thank you for that. Yeah, Dr. McKeezy, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, and Mimi, thank you for saying that. I had a conversation earlier with the group of educators and said that what we're asking young people to do is to be a part of something that we say we don't even love, right? You got a lot of educators who say the job is too hard, we don't get paid enough money, but we're saying it out loud to groups of people who are impressionable, right? Why would they want to be us, right? There was a point in time where our children would get up every day and they want to be teachers, right? They get their dolls, like my daughter would get her dolls and her stuffed animals around, and what she would do, she would teach them. And I think she has had that experience, obviously, because her dad has been in education, but she's also had some really great teachers that really have shown her how important it is to kind of to follow your dreams and your passions. I think we kill dreams and passions of young people getting into education very, very early. And, some of it obviously because they've had bad experiences, but more importantly, because we as educators have put ourselves in these positions to be the judge, jury, and executioner of their futures, right? So we're basically telling them, don't do this, don't do this. And again, they're impressionable. So guess what they're going to do? Not do it, right? Especially if we say, well, we send kids to school to make money and to, get good jobs. But if somebody who's educated tells them, no, don't get into this profession, there's not enough money, Why would a kid decide to do that? And so I'm really glad Mimi brought that up in this conversation, because when we're talking about really getting to the root cause as to why our young people, why more Black and brown children aren't getting involved in education, sometimes we got to look within and ask, are we the culprits that have created this space where young people don't want to be part of what it is, this amazing space? If you remember, I think I talked to you all about it earlier. No matter where I go throughout this country and I'm speaking, I always start by saying, I am Dennis McKeezy. I've been in this profession, this beloved profession of ours for 30 years. My thing is, I want people to understand how much I love this profession. And when I say our, that means everybody in the room should embrace the fact that this is a beloved profession and we make tremendous impact. Again, I think most jobs will assume that would say the same thing. No one makes enough money, right? Especially if we have the lifestyles that we live. So I just think it's important that we recognize that as educators, we may actually be a part of the problem by not acknowledging the fact that we are also pushing young people away from this profession by ultimately saying that, no, you shouldn't be involved in this.
Yeah, thank you for that. And your beloved career, right? Beloved profession.
Absolutely.
Of teaching, right? It's important to center that love and make sure everybody knows. So I'm gonna come back around to you, Kaylin. Do you have any field stories that highlight the real life consequences of past or recent policy shifts?
Yeah, and I think that that's been some of the most compelling parts of our stories. The ones that have been the most read are the ones that highlight and lift up the voices of people who've been directly affected by what's happening at the Department of Ed. I'd say one of the most recent examples is when DOGE cut a bunch of the research contracts. There was a lot of discussion about, like, what is that actually going to do? Does that really matter for schools? And so we focused on a particular grant program that was funding research for helping high schoolers with disabilities transition to life after high school. And this was a really large study. It was over 1,000 kids. Lots and lots of teachers were trained to help them. This is something that is incredibly under-researched and really needs to be better understood. And so we were able to find one of the families that had been participating that lost their services and were no longer able to work with their coach. And so I spoke with the mother of a teenager who had autism and lots of other medical needs. And she had said that, I had so little guidance, and this was like something that was really motivating for me. And it went away. I found her on Facebook. She had been talking a little bit about it. And I messaged her and kept reaching out. And luckily she spoke with me. And NPR actually just featured the family in a longer look. But I think it's been really important to look on social media, to look everywhere for families who are sharing their stories about personally being affected, because people need to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, I love that, right? And we hear so much news, and a lot of it is like big picture general, but it doesn't really hit home until it's a story that we could connect to, or it's a story of somebody from a city that we live in. So yeah, those personal stories, and that's a big part of just the work we do in general, working with adults or working with students, right? Storytelling, right? Like Dennis shared, he's telling his story about his love for education, right? Mimi speaking about she shared her story about a teacher that shared something with her, and I started making connections. I didn't have that same exact story, but I've had stories with teachers that have impacted me and the way I navigate life. So yeah, storytelling is just a big part of making those connections and making everything that we're doing feel real, because it is real. It's real. There's real people being impacted by this. And you went all the way to Facebook. So, we lucky to have somebody like you that's really on the ground trying to make sure you find those stories. So I appreciate you for that. Yeah, so Dennis, speaking of storytelling, right? What leadership mindsets are most important in moments like these, right? And is there like a story that you could share, like of someone who has, even though, because oftentimes, right, when we're coaching and mentoring and leading, right,
Mhm.
sometimes people don't realize that we're being inspired and motivated by the very people that we're coaching, right? So
Yeah.
can you share a story related to that and the leadership mindset that's present in that individual?
Yeah, the first person that comes to mind is a good friend of mine, Principal Amen Raw, who just started this tech company, Knowledge. And one of the things that, I went out and visited him when he was a principal. I was coaching him when he was a principal out in Watts, California. And our conversation would always be around that, you can't lead the future with yesterday's mindset. And because he was just always engaged in things, about the future, and just realizing that technology is something that we have to take a more in-depth look at. And so when I go remember going to his school, I want to say this 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I remember going to rooms that were his classrooms were in bungalows, right? It wasn't a traditional school building. It was bungalows. And you go in there and there is 3D printers. The conversation around AI was happening at his school way back then. We would see that children, young people would actually be, when and this was even before, it was probably just before the pandemic, his children, when his students were using laptops and Chromebooks on a consistent basis, and it just enhanced it during COVID. But the thing that I keep remembering in that visit with him was that this idea of having a new vision and new values, but using an old script, like it's just not the thing to do. And he truly inspired me to look at things a lot different. So on Instagram and Facebook and things, he and I are constantly sharing some of the newest technologies that we both seen. Funny enough, he's had this conversation around AI and ChatGPT well before most people I ever known. And the discussion that he and I would have about it was that this is a runaway train. 3 years ago, this was a runaway train, and we are still far behind. So the conversation about how do we actually change the future, and we're still using yesterday's mindset, just truly didn't align to what we believe our young people needed. And so to watch him do that, and then to transform into now a CEO of his own tech company, doing some amazing things with his company knowledge. It is truly inspiring to see that somebody is now taking this mindset of futuristic learning to another level. And he's one of the very few black tech owned, black owned tech companies in the country. And he was formerly a principal. So I look at this stuff and I think about the demands, right? That the leaders like him, he was futuristic, he was an architect, and he was a legacy builder, right? That's just who Ra was, and that's who Ra is. But great leaders have always done that, right? And so you just got to think about, when we talk about college and career readiness, and most of the schools that we go visit nowadays, Kareem and Jamila and Mimi and Kaylin, the schools we visit are not preparing kids for the jobs that are not yet created. We're actually preparing them for jobs that are being wiped out every single day. So I think the conversation around what college and career readiness is needs also to take another, we need to take that conversation up a notch as well, because we're truly not doing a good enough job, I think, when it comes to preparing children for the futuristic occupations that have not been developed at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that insight, right? And shout out to Principal Ra and Knowledge, Knowledge, just in case y'all Googling it. Yeah, so innovation, right? BMEC, OSG, Center for Black Educator Development. We do it for the culture. Chalkbeat Knowledge did not always exist, right? A gap was noticed, something was missing that students needed, and it was filled because we remained innovative. So thank you for highlighting that. Innovation is that mindset we got to keep at the center. So before we transition to the Q&A for the audience, I just have one question for you, Mimi, and then when we open it up, all of our panelists can jump in and respond to the questions. Mimi, from your perspective, what can individuals and organizations do to support each other through advocacy and collaboration?
Sure. I mean, I would say first and foremost, we would love to invite everyone that's listening to this webinar to participate in our 2025 Black Teacher Appreciation Day initiative, which is coming up on May 8th, 2025. So please save the date. This is an initiative that's connected to our larger We Need Black Teachers campaign that was actually developed by our youth that's a part of our programming. So we want to make sure that this is a campaign that we can continue to uplift and raise awareness around the need for Black teachers, and also the impact that Black educators have and how they serve as catalysts for change and guiding the next generation. And we want to also make sure that folks understand the reality of Black educators being able to inspire, to connect, and transform students of all races and backgrounds. And we want to amplify their their efforts. We want to and just continue to, you know, extend our deep gratitude for everything that they're doing, the seen and the unseen. We know that the invisible tax is real, and so we want to continue to acknowledge them for their efforts. I'll also mention that we try and engage influencers to participate in this campaign in some capacity, because we know so many heavy hitters within our culture are actually impacted by Black teachers. And one example I can just think of at the top of my head was Kendrick Lamar, who's like a voice for, you know, my generation. And a lot of folks don't understand that he was actually inspired by his poetry teacher, a Black man, to engage in rap and storytelling. And so I think it's just so important to, you know, reflect back on educators that have made an impact on our lives, or if you're an educator, you know, the impact that you may have made on someone's life. So we want to amplify that work through the storytelling initiative via this We Need Black Teachers campaign. So we invite everyone to join us on May 8th, and you can learn more about our work by following us on all socials at Center Black Ed, or by visiting our website, www.centerblacked.org.
Thank you for that, Mimi. And we will be sharing that information with everybody who's a part of the session today. All attendees, you will get this information in a follow-up email. All right. So I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Jamila.
Yeah.
All right.
What a powerful conversation. And thank you to everyone that has been populating the Q&A chat. And so we're going to ask a few questions. The first one is coming from Jose Flores. The question is, how can organizations and individuals support in maintaining the Department of Education? So whoever wants to address that, how can organizations and individuals support in maintaining the Department of Education? What could we be doing to mobilize so that we are not dismantling everything that we work so hard for? And that's pretty much open to anyone that would like to answer.
Well, I guess I'll try to. No, please, Caitlin, go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say, in the spirit of saying that it would take an act of Congress to get rid of the Department of Education, I do think this is a moment to be calling your legislators and understanding where they would stand if there was some kind of legislation brought to them. What would they do? And trying to put pressure on the people who represent you, because ultimately they would be making the decision.
Yeah, I think, you know, Jamila, I would ultimately say, you know what, let's I think get all the answers first. Let's get all the answers for the question behind the dismantling of the Department of Education before we jump out there and start giving solutions, right? Because, you know, many of us who've actually done work in inner city schools and in areas that have been failing children for centuries. You know what I'm saying? That we got communities that generation after generation have been failing children. And I think we have to find a way to reimagine it. We don't necessarily need to completely obliterate it. But I definitely think that we have to be open to a conversation to those of us who realize that, you know, I've been in the Harlem community for 20 plus years. And I can tell you that some of the schools that were failing back then are still failing now. So a conversation has to be had, not about necessarily about whether or not we're going to maintain a Department of Education, but if we all going to maintain it, then there has to be a greater level of oversight to what it is that's working and not working. And I think that conversation has to happen on a larger level, because, as I said, there are many of us who have actually been in these communities who've said this for a very long time. We need to blow this system up. That's what we've said for quite some time. So let's just make sure that when we're having this conversation, we're having it open and honest about what it is that's been going on in these communities for a very long time.
Absolutely. Thank you all for that. The next question is coming from Alexa Cruz, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your name. And this question is for Dr. McKeezy and Kareem. You mentioned that you work with administrators now, that you are starting to do the work, but you have to shift the language based on what is going on. Can you give an example of this? I'm currently an education consultant who speaks about the banned items, so language such as culturally responsive practices, et cetera, in a classroom for students with disabilities and English language learners. So just this whole idea that we're going to continue the work, but we have to change the language.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's a couple of really important words that we can always put that doesn't shift the mission. We got to talk about things that are research based, student centered, that will increase engagement. And I think when you start using language like that, it becomes more inclusive. And I'm not saying that we should, again, not address that. But when you're talking about something that's really research based and student centered, that's ultimately saying that we should ultimately look at every student as important as everybody else in the school. So I think just maybe just shifting it a little bit, like we don't move away from your mission. Don't do that. But again, people love to hear those words, and I think educators, that's what we do anyway. Research based, student centered, increasing student engagement. You answer those questions, and I think it's very easy to now plug in ENL students, special needs students, talented and gifted students, students on the spectrum. You can include them in all of those because you should be focused on those three things anyway.
Absolutely. And I also want to highlight just the importance of including our parents in these conversations and mobilizing with parents, especially as it pertains to curriculum and this idea around erasing, anything that's related to Black history or Latinx history or any history of people of color in this nation. I think it's really important that we remind parents that they are taxpayers, and the curriculum that their student is receiving is paid for with tax-paying dollars. And so I think it's really important that we include our parents in this discussion to make sure that they have their voices are amplified and they're mobilizing to speak up and speak out against some of these things that may be happening in certain districts. And then the last question is coming from Mark Merrill of Knowledge. How do we help leaders who do not see the importance of cultural relevance around SEL, attendance, and sports like golf?
Send Kareem in there to go yell at them and tell them to fix the problem immediately. No, but I think that that was a really great question that Mark has, and I truly believe that these are the conversations that have to be had again on the district level as well, right? So if the principal's deciding that this isn't of importance to them, it actually shows a little bit more about what the beliefs of the district is, right? Because the district leader would be the one to say that this is what we do, this is what we stand for, and it's a more inclusive model that we have in the school. So I think, Mark, to be able to answer that question, I think we have to take a closer look as to who's making that decision. There's very few districts in this country where the principal's making these kind of decisions in isolation that cannot be that can't be mandated or at least strongly recommended by the superintendent and deputy superintendents in most districts. So it is just important that we realize that this conversation should not be left to a principal to make that decision by his or herself, because you impact the entire district. And so I just say maybe if that doesn't work, take it up the ladder a little bit to the district afterwards.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, you can also use your raise your hand feature at this time. And if not, I really want to kind of wrap up some of the things that we talked about this evening. Let's give a virtual clap to our panel, a really powerful discussion this evening. And so we do it for the culture. We have this phrase, social emotional liberation. So we've replaced the word learning with liberation because liberation sends this message that, we're not free until we're all free. And so when I think about emotion, when emotion meets strategy and action, that is social emotional liberation. And so for all of you that are on this webinar this evening, and thinking about the power of education as a tool for liberation, what I hear from all of our panelists tonight is that as leaders in education, we have to be bold. What I'm hearing is that there are creative ways to ensure all students learn. What I'm also hearing is that we cannot do this work alone. So building coalitions, coming together allows us to move faster and deeper and have more impact. Legally, we have to make sure that we are using the legal system that we have. So taking up lawsuits in conjunction with organizations such as the ACLU. And then last but not least, it all starts up here. And so having that future thinking mentality and being innovative and being resilient is extremely important in order for us to continue this work and make sure that every single student feels seen, feels heard, feels valued, and is being educated. So if there aren't any other questions, I'm going to turn it back over to Kareem to take us out. I want to thank you all for your insight, your profound approach to this work, and just a sense of urgency that we have right now in order to continue. Kareem?
Yeah, thank you for that, Jamila. Before we officially close out, I know these are conversations that can go on for well, there's no stopping point, right, for these types of conversations, but we only do have about 6 minutes. But is there anything before I do my closing? Is there anything that any of you want to share with the audience? A key takeaway or anything like that?
I say just again, be bold. Exercise a level of boldness when you're going to attack a problem like DEI or equity in particular. So I just think that boldness will truly transcend those things that that you hear by way of noise. Boldness will push you to that place where you understand that young people are at the core of the work that we do, and so that boldness will push us again past whatever insecurities or fears that we have, because we know that we didn't have to take this job. We chose to be educators, we chose to be leaders, and so if you're going to do it, you do it with boldness and make sure that the things that you do are truly centered around young people.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dr. McKeezy.
And sorry, go ahead, Kaylin.
I was just going to say, in the spirit of the power of storytelling, I just wanted to put a link here in the chat, and I can share it later too. Anybody who is a teacher or educator who has a first-person story that they think others should be hearing right now, we publish these on our website, and they're often really rooted in people's research and personal experiences in their classrooms. And I think now is a moment where people should be hearing what's happening. So please feel free to reach out if you have a pitch that you would want to submit.
Yeah, thank you for that, Kaylin. So make sure y'all share those stories. I know we the power is in storytelling, and I know we all have plenty of stories that others need to hear.
And if we have time for one more question, this one just came through, and I think it's really important. We've been speaking a lot of indirectly about teachers, but this question is really focusing on the messaging to students. Would love to hear anyone's thoughts on how to best support students who are expressing concerns about the DOE being shut down and have awareness that this may directly impact them, especially Black and Brown students and students with special needs.
I mean, I can go ahead and jump in and say, we've always considered education to be the civil rights issue of our time. And so we do believe that a lot of our civil rights movements in the past and even in the present will continue to be driven by students. And we look to them for answers, for solutions, for hope. to show us what's possible. And so I understand that there is clearly an attack right now on students on so many fronts, and even trying to silence them. But I do feel like this is still the best advice that we can give to young people is, like, continue to tap into your voice. Don't let them silence you, but continue to raise awareness, and whatever your ecosystem that you're operating, whatever resources you have, just continue to leverage them. And once again, like I said, tap into your community, and just do something. I don't think this is a time to sit back and relax and chill and be like, oh, someone else is going to figure it out. Like, absolutely not. And we should never give anyone else that kind of power. So this is a time to act.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Really great questions this evening. We are going to be sending out some resources to everyone. So you'll have resources from all of the organizations represented tonight. Chalkbeat, Kaylin already put that link in the chat, but we'll make sure it's also in a resource guide that's going to go out to all of you here on this webinar this evening. You'll also receive information about off-school grounds in addition to the Center for Black Educator Development.
Yes. And we did this tonight for the culture, and we appreciate all of you. Chalkbeat, your newsletter. I applied to that when I first heard about Chalkbeat years ago. So I'm always getting the latest news. Mimi, I'm a part of your newsletter. Dennis, I've been to the conference. I've been on the Thursday meetup. So again, just community. I know that there are everybody on this call. Anytime I may be feeling a little bit doubtful about our future, I know that there's people out there doing the work like y'all, and that keeps me motivated and inspired, because I know as much as we all feed into each other, into others, we need others to feed into us as well. So I'm just extremely grateful for all of you and the work that you all do. And I'm excited to share more about the work that you do with all of the attendees that are on this call today. So bless up, and just extremely, extremely, extremely abundant amounts of gratitude for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. For more information about We Do It for the Culture, you can visit www.wedoit4theculture.com and look out for those resources that will be coming to you within the next 24 hours. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.